she got herself into quite a difficult position where she appeared to be suggesting that it'd be fine if Floyd Mayweather and Usain Bolt.
It's not something I've given a huge amount of thought to, Piers, but don't have a sex change and go through all of this so that they can, compete in a sport for a women's team or a men's team.
In the next few minutes, you'll witness a political meltdown that sent shockwaves through Westminster. We'll reveal how Piers Morgan cornered Rachel Reeves on Labour's economic plans. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. You'll see Reeves struggle to defend her party's contradictory statements on taxes, fail to explain their ambitious housing targets, and ultimately lose control of the narrative. Stay tuned for the full breakdown. Rachel Reeves strode into the studio, exuding confidence. Her polished demeanor suggested she was ready for anything Piers Morgan might throw her way.
This happens to be a big issue that's blown up this week. World Rugby have announced it. It's causing a huge amount of debate.
That's not what I came on to speak about this morning, and the specific
hang on,
issue.
listen, you're a shadow cabinet minister. You don't just come on to talk about one thing. You come on this programme as a shadow cabinet minister or a cabinet minister, you should expect to be asked about anything that's been in the news as serious consequences for cross-sections of the community, shouldn't you?
Little did she know, this interview would become a masterclass in political evasion and contradictions. Morgan kicked things off with a seemingly innocuous question about Labour's tax policy. Reeves, ever prepared, launched into her rehearsed response. But before she could gain momentum, Morgan pounced. He interrupted her with a damning quote from her own past statements, catching her completely off guard. The Shadow Chancellor's composure began to crack as she fumbled to reconcile her contradictory positions. On one hand, she had promised no new tax rises during the campaign. On the other, Labour had since introduced new taxes and hinted at further increases. The cognitive dissonance was palpable. Morgan, sensing blood in the water, pressed harder. He presented a barrage of evidence, highlighting Labour's shifting stance on tax increases. Reeves attempted to deflect, but her arguments grew increasingly incoherent. She found herself trapped in a web of her own party's inconsistencies. The interview reached a tipping point as Reeves failed to provide a clear explanation for Labour's economic plan. Morgan, relentless in his pursuit, quoted her directly. "It's not just about missing numbers. It's about the contradictions that keep popping up. One day, Labour promises no tax rises, and the next, there's talk of new taxes being introduced." Viewers watched in real time as Reeves's credibility eroded. Her inability to defend Labour's $40 billion tax-raising budget, described by some as the biggest tax-raising budget in history, left her floundering. Morgan didn't let up, highlighting the criticism from tax experts who argued that raising national insurance was one of the worst taxes to increase on employers. As the segment drew to a close, Reeves looked visibly shaken. Her initial confidence had evaporated, replaced by a deer-in-the-headlights expression. The Shadow Chancellor's performance raised serious questions about Labour's economic credibility and their ability to govern effectively. It was clear that this interview would have far-reaching consequences for both Reeves and her party. With Reeves already on the back foot, Morgan sensed an opportunity. He turned to Labour's housing policy, a topic that should have been Reeves's stronghold. But as he delved deeper, a startling question emerged. Could Labour's grand promise of 1.5 million new homes actually worsen the UK's housing crisis? At first, Reeves seemed relieved by the change in subject. She eagerly launched into Labour's ambitious plan to build 1.5 million homes, her enthusiasm palpable. But Morgan, ever the skilled interviewer, quickly cut through the rehearsed talking points. He demanded specifics on funding and timelines, catching Reeves off guard. As Reeves fumbled for details, Morgan introduced statements from housing experts. These professionals had expressed serious doubts about the feasibility of Labour's plan, particularly regarding the timeline and funding necessary to achieve such ambitious construction goals. Reeves's composure began to crack as she struggled to counter their arguments. Morgan pressed further, highlighting historical data that showed UK housing construction rates consistently failing to meet targets. This revelation cast a long shadow over Labour's lofty promises. Reeves, now visibly flustered, attempted to pivot back to her party's commitment to addressing the housing crisis. But her lack of concrete answers only served to underscore the impracticality of Labour's flagship policy. The interview took an unexpected turn when Morgan raised the issue of potential occupants for these new homes. He pointed out that only about half of the proposed 1.5 million homes would actually go on the market for purchase, with many being allocated for social housing. Then came the kicker. Morgan asked how this plan would address the needs of asylum seekers, effectively tying the housing issue to the contentious topic of immigration. Reeves, caught completely off guard, stumbled through a response. Her attempts to dodge the question only highlighted the lack of comprehensive planning behind Labour's housing strategy. As she struggled to reconcile the party's housing promises with public concerns about immigration and housing availability, the disconnect became glaringly apparent. By the end of the segment, Reeves appeared utterly defeated. Her inability to defend Labour's flagship policy left viewers questioning not just the feasibility of the housing plan, but the party's overall economic credibility. The interview had exposed a fundamental weakness in Labour's platform, leaving Reeves and her party vulnerable to further scrutiny and criticism. Rachel Reeves's interview with Piers Morgan turned into a political disaster, exposing deep flaws in Labour's economic plans. From the moment Morgan confronted her with contradictory statements on tax policy, Reeves struggled to maintain her composure. Her inability to reconcile Labour's promise of no new taxes with their subsequent tax-raising proposals left her floundering. The housing segment proved equally damaging. Reeves failed to provide concrete details on funding and timelines for Labour's ambitious 1.5 million homes target. When pressed on how this plan would address the needs of asylum seekers, she appeared completely unprepared, highlighting a lack of comprehensive planning. The fallout from the interview was swift and severe. Public figures wasted no time in criticizing Labour's economic strategies. Jeremy Clarkson expressed concerns about the impact of Labour's tax hikes on farmers and families. Kirsty Allsop went further, claiming Reeves had destroyed their ability to pass farms on to their children. As the dust settles on this disastrous interview, a crucial question emerges. Can Labour recover its economic credibility? Or has Reeves's performance dealt a fatal blow to the party's chances of convincing voters they can manage the nation's finances?